Welcome back, scholars. This time it is lesson 6-3.4, Portugal and Exploration. Today we are going to be focused solely on the Portuguese and their early efforts of exploration. So let's get to it. Beginning, I'd like to remind us all about Prince Henry the Navigator. I said I'd circle back to him because he is an important character in history. Without Prince Henry, the age of exploration does not begin when it begins, and quite possibly for a long time. Now, Prince Henry himself, he is inspired by Marco Polo. If you recall, Marco Polo is that Venetian merchant who traveled to the east and saw Mongol China and came back with all these stories of wealth and luxury in that area of the world. And here's Prince Henry the Navigator 150 years later, and he's reading the accounts of Marco Polo, and he's reading about all this luxury and all these goods, and he wants to get his hands on that. But Portugal has a serious problem. You see, to reach the east, Portugal's going to have to become a world-leading naval power. Because, as we know, Europe is an outpost on the Silk Road. To reach Europe, you have to come through that Ottoman Empire. They control all the land travel and all the sea travel through the Mediterranean Sea. You have to go through Ottoman land after that. And once you get to Europe itself, the furthest outpost from all this Silk Road trade is right over here in Portugal. In this Iberian Peninsula, Portugal is so far removed that their chances of being a major player on Silk Road trade is virtually non-existent, unless they could take advantage of their position on the Atlantic Ocean and get into this trade by becoming a naval power. And so Prince Henry the Navigator, he gathers together sailors and astronomers, and they study navigation, and they create the Caravelle. Using all this technology that's trickling to them through Arab scholars and through trade, this Caravelle is the culmination of all the best minds and all the best technology of the day. And it is the most advanced ship in the world at that time. Now, Portugal gets going with this age of exploration because of Prince Henry the Navigator. And it is absolutely Portugal that is the early leader in the age of exploration. Spain is going to pass them eventually. But Prince Henry gets it going. That is why he has this nickname, Prince Henry the Navigator, for all of his efforts in starting the age of exploration. And with these new caravels, the Portuguese now have an advantage. They can sail farther, they can sail faster than any other Europeans. And they start exploring. And they start going around Africa, because that's going to be the only route they have. You can't go up this way. They discovered that actually early in their explorations. They hit too much ice. You couldn't sail around Europe and Asia this way. You had to go down and around Africa. So in the 1400s, 1430s somewhat, but really getting going in the 40s and 50s, you see the Portuguese hitting these African communities. And they were well aware of these ones right up here early on, being close to Iberia and part of the Ottoman Empire and its extensions. But the further down they went, they came into more and more contact with societies that they didn't know of before. And so they become the first Europeans to really get credit for the exploration of Africa. Not just contact with Africa, but true exploration. Now, in the beginning of this exploration, the Portuguese were interested in it. They were fascinated in it. It's like, we're going places that no European has gone before. But they had no idea what it was they were exploring. You look at the maps of the time, and they're indistinct with the African border at a minimum. Or they really shortchange Africa on its actual size. The Portuguese in the 1430s, 1440s, 1450s, they did not think that Africa was much larger than Europe. They pretty quickly recognized that it was larger than Europe, but they didn't think it was much larger than Europe. And they definitely thought that once they sailed around that western part of Africa, they'd be able to cut right through to Asia. Well, they're going to learn that that's not the case. as they sailed south and as they passed the Sahara, they realized that Africa is much larger than they thought it was, and that it's much more civilized than they realized it was. That there are coherent, strong, wealthy empires south of the Sahara in Africa. Now, these societies had been trading with Arab merchants across the Sahara for a long time, but the true stories of their wealth had not really hit Portugal. Portugal had to get down there and see it for themselves to really understand the power of these empires. And so, the ultimate goal of reaching Asia slows down. As the Portuguese realize there might be something worthwhile slowing down and seeing if we can take advantage of in Africa itself. So it's going to be another 50, 60 years before the Portuguese sail around Africa and do eventually reach Asia, as they slow down to really focus in particular on this area of West Africa to see what they can do and how they can take advantage of this empire and those markets. So let's look at who they found. The people that they first encountered was the Empire of Mali. The Empire of Mali, we mentioned once several lessons ago very briefly. It's going to control and dominate a substantial part of West Africa. From 1230s until about 1500, Mali is the most significant empire in this region. Now, 1450 or so, they're already going into decline a bit, but they're going to hold on. They're going to be important, and the Portuguese are going to have quite a bit of contact with this empire. Now, Mali was an Islamic kingdom. Remember, they'd had contact with the Arab merchants, and Islam had spread through those trade connections. So we had an Islamic kingdom, not Christian. So think back to your causes of exploration. The Portuguese, if they wanted to expand Christianity, this might be one of the ways, one of the areas they could do that. But they also wanted wealth. Well, we have a wealthy trade empire. So they're moving into that region. It is governed by the city of Timbuktu, which was a major city in the world at the time and was very wealthy. And the Europeans had really no idea about it. Now, once the Portuguese are down there, they see right away Mali's got a lot of gold. They've got a lot of gold. And that is their initial trade interest. It's like, oh, what can we do to get this gold? We want to have this wealth. This is incredible. Let's see what we can get for it. But Mali's been trading gold for a while, and they pretty quickly trade away a lot of that gold. And the Portuguese start looking for other trade goods as well. And one of those things that they start to look at that eventually becomes the main trade good coming out of the region is slaves. We're going to talk a little bit more about slavery today and a lot more in our next lesson to really see how the Portuguese are involved in this slave trade, and then later how the Spanish kick it up to a whole nother level. But let's stay focused on West Africa for a moment. See, the Portuguese, because they have interest in trade in the area, and particularly in the slave trade, Portugal is going to, in some cases, encourage Mali to fight wars against their neighbors. And in some cases, to even treat their neighbors abusively. This will have a backlash on Mali, but the advantage for Portugal is whenever Mali is at war with somebody, whenever they attack and raid other villages and other peoples, they bring back those peoples as slaves. And they sell them to the Portuguese, who then bring them into the larger slave market. So we start to see the large mass enslavement of Africans for sale on this international market during this time. It wasn't the first time that people have been sold into slavery, certainly, but it's going to be the first time the Europeans are involved in this trade on a large scale. One of Mali's rivals, however, is going to rise up against this. This actually begins early during the Portuguese exploration time and is not necessarily connected to Mali's interactions with Portugal. Songhai had plenty of reasons to dislike Mali and wanted to be in charge, but certainly Mali's behavior is going to inflame a lot of that. And they're going to rise up against Mali, and eventually they're going to control most of what had once been the empire of Mali. So they really do have a lot of success, and Songhai kind of takes over around 1500. Now, these conflicts are actually good for the Portuguese because whenever Mali won a battle against Songhai, they would take those captured warriors or captured people in raids on villages, and Mali would sell them to the Portuguese, and vice versa. Portuguese began purchasing some of these slaves from Songhai as well. And the reason why Mali and Songhai are so interested in selling these slaves to the Portuguese is that the Portuguese have realized that they can sell weapons of war. They can make European weaponry, which is quickly becoming advanced weaponry, to the Africans. And the Africans would continue this fighting and capturing more and more slaves, which benefited the Portuguese themselves. And so we see Portuguese exploration of Africa leading to the trade in gold and slaves out of Africa. This is really just the start of that story. And we will be spending substantial chunks of time looking into the slave trade out of West Africa. But this is how it got started. That's all for today, and I'll see you next time.